Michael Landon, the beloved star of Bonanza and Little House on the Prairie, lived in a large, elegant house in Malibu during the final years of his life. After his passing in 1991, the property eventually changed hands, but like many Hollywood homes with history, it carried with it more than just memories, it carried a presence. Years later, the house was purchased by a middle-aged couple from San Diego, Richard and Elaine Morgan, who had long admired Landon's work and were captivated by the idea of living in a piece of Hollywood history. They were practical, grounded people not given to superstition. Elaine was a retired teacher, Richard an architect, and together they hoped the Malibu property would serve as both a quiet retreat and a place to host family gatherings. From the start, the Morgans were struck by the warmth of the house. The sunlit rooms, the expansive ocean views, and the rustic touches Landon had added gave the impression of comfort. But almost immediately, things began to happen that didn't fit the idyllic picture. At night, the sound of footsteps often carried down the long wooden hallway, heavy and measured, as if someone were pacing. Doors left firmly shut would be found wide open in the morning. Elaine swore she heard a man's voice humming low, steady, and vaguely familiar in the kitchen, though Richard dismissed it as the wind. Family members visiting noticed it too. Their daughter said she once woke up to see the silhouette of a tall man standing at the foot of the guest bed, motionless, before dissolving into the shadows. The Morgans never felt outright threatened, but there was an undeniable presence in the home. Richard, who often worked late on designs at the dining table, said he sometimes felt as though someone was standing right behind him, watching. More than once, he turned quickly, certain Elaine had walked in, only to find the room empty. The strange thing was that the house didn't feel malicious, it felt protective. As though Michael Landon himself, known for his larger-than-life but kind personality, had never truly left. Neighbors who had known him in life said the same. He loved that house. He poured his spirit into it. If he's anywhere, he's there. The Morgans eventually made peace with the haunting. They spoke aloud to the house when odd things happened, saying, "Hello, Michael," when lights flickered or when that soft humming came from the kitchen. Over time, it became part of the rhythm of living there. They still host family gatherings, and though guests sometimes leave unsettled, Richard and Elaine remain. To them, the presence is not a reason to leave, it's a reminder that they're sharing space with history, with the essence of a man who brought joy to millions. The Morgans had lived in Michael Landon's old Malibu home for just a few months when the subtle strangeness began to take root. At first, it was little things, the creak of footsteps when no one was in the hall, the faint smell of cigar smoke drifting into the living room though neither Richard nor Elaine smoked. They tried to dismiss it as quirks of an old house, but soon the oddities became too precise, too personal to ignore. The long wooden hallway that ran through the center of the house became a place of unease. At night, when the house should have been still, they would hear a steady rhythm of footsteps, measured, purposeful, almost rehearsed. Elaine would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound approach and then retreat, back and forth, as though someone were pacing endlessly. Richard once opened the door in the middle of it, hoping to catch their teenage son sneaking around during a visit, but the hallway was empty, stretching dark and silent in both directions. The sound stopped the moment he stepped into it, and the air was thick, charged, like before a thunderstorm. Elaine grew most unsettled in the kitchen. She often rose early, before dawn, to make coffee. More than once, while she stood waiting for the kettle to boil, she heard a man's low humming. It wasn't random noise, it carried a tune, something steady, as though someone was working through the melody of an old song. She tried to hum it back one morning, nervously, and the humming stopped as if the unseen presence had been startled. From then on, she refused to be in the kitchen alone before sunrise or after midnight. Yet the house never felt cruel. There was fear, yes, but not the sense of being hunted, rather the weight of being watched by someone who still had a claim over the space. Richard, the more pragmatic of the two, began to believe the spirit wasn't there to frighten them but to make sure the house was respected. Whenever he worked late, sketching designs at the dining table, he swore he could feel someone behind him, tall, broad-shouldered, leaning in as though studying his work. It unnerved him at first, but he grew oddly comforted by the thought. The first undeniable encounter came when their daughter, Emily, stayed for the weekend. She had always been skeptical of her parents' stories until one night she woke to see a figure at the foot of the guest bed. The man was tall, with broad shoulders, standing in silence, watching. She blinked, expecting the shape to dissolve into shadows, but instead, it lingered for a long moment before simply fading, as though the air swallowed him whole. Shaken, she left the house the next morning without staying for breakfast, telling her parents she wouldn't sleep in that room again. When Elaine mentioned the experiences to neighbors who had lived in Malibu for decades, they only nodded knowingly. Michael loved that place, one woman said. He spent more time building that home than he did anywhere else. It was his refuge. Another added, "Don't be surprised if he never left. That house is his." The Morgans began to talk to the house, addressing the unseen presence as though it were a member of the family. When the lights flickered, they said, "Hello, Michael." When the footsteps passed down the hallway, they murmured, "We hear you." Over time, the fear dulled into something stranger. Coexistence. The Morgans found themselves falling into a rhythm with the house, as though its unseen occupant had woven itself into their daily routines. What began as occasional disturbances soon deepened into a pattern, subtle reminders that they were never truly alone in the Malibu property that once belonged to Michael Landon. In the evenings, when the ocean winds pressed against the glass doors and the waves echoed faintly from below the cliffs, the Morgans would gather in the living room. They noticed that the old stone fireplace seemed to hold a peculiar warmth, even when no fire burned. Elaine once swore she saw the faint outline of a man seated in the armchair near the hearth, shoulders broad, posture relaxed, as if he were listening to the quiet hum of the television. She blinked, and the shape was gone. Yet the indentation on the chair cushion lingered until morning, as though someone had only just risen. The study, where Landon had once written and read scripts, carried a heavier weight. Richard, often drawn to the room by its shelves lined with books left behind, found himself unable to concentrate when working at the old desk. Papers would shift slightly when he stepped out of the room, his pen rolling to the edge as though nudged by an invisible hand. Once, as he leaned over blueprints, he distinctly heard the whisper of pages turning in the corner. The desk lamp flickered, not with the randomness of faulty wiring, but with the rhythm of someone tapping 3 times, pause 3 times again. At night, the balcony overlooking the Pacific became a place both haunting and strangely peaceful. Elaine, unable to sleep, would sometimes stand outside wrapped in a shawl, gazing at the moonlit water. More than once she felt the sensation of someone standing close behind her, tall enough that the presence seemed to shadow her completely. There was no fear, only a strange weight to the moment, as if the figure shared her view in silence. On one such night, she swore she heard a man exhale softly, almost a sigh, carried away by the sea breeze. Their children, who visited less frequently now, found the atmosphere unbearable. Their son refused to sleep in the guest room after hearing the pacing in the hallway stop directly outside his door, the handle rattling as though someone tried to turn it. Emily, who had already seen the figure once, described a dream she had in which a man's voice calmly told her, "You're safe here, but don't forget whose house this is." She awoke in tears, refusing to stay another night. The Morgans, however, did not retreat. With each unsettling moment came an odd reassurance. This was not a house that wanted them gone, but a house that demanded acknowledgement. Richard began leaving a single light burning in the study each night, muttering a quiet, "Good night, Michael," before heading to bed. Elaine placed fresh flowers near the fireplace once a week, feeling it was somehow expected, a gesture of respect to the man who had built the home's soul. The house responded in kind. The footsteps grew less frequent, the humming softer, and the cold drafts that once slipped under doors seemed to warm. Yet the presence remained, a constant companion, reminding them of the life once lived within those walls. The Morgans had come to know the rhythms of the house, its peculiar blend of comfort and unease. They never doubted that the presence belonged to Michael Landon himself, still bound to the place he had loved. But over time, the balance between reassurance and fear began to shift. One stormy winter evening, the power went out across the coast. The Morgans lit candles and gathered in the living room, the ocean crashing violently below. As the rain lashed against the windows, Elaine noticed the fireplace glowing faintly, though no fire had been lit. A warmth spread through the room, stronger than any candle, and in the flickering light she saw it clearly. The silhouette of a tall man seated in the armchair by the hearth, his features obscured yet unmistakably present. Richard and Elaine froze. For a long moment, the figure remained, his head slightly bowed, hands resting on the arms of the chair. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it dissolved into the shadows. The armchair sat empty, but both of them swore the air still held the weight of a man's presence. Word of the haunting spread quietly among family and friends. Some refused to stay the night after hearing the hallway footsteps or feeling the icy breath of someone close to their ear. Others described dreams so vivid Michael standing in the study, urging them to take care of this house, that they left shaken, unwilling to visit again. The Morgans stopped inviting guests, realizing the home no longer welcomed outsiders. By spring, the Morgans felt worn down. Living in the house had become like sharing it with a third occupant, one who made no demands but never allowed them true peace. Richard confessed one night that he had begun speaking to the presence as if it were a business partner, updating him on repairs and plans. Elaine, meanwhile, admitted that she often felt watched even in her most private moments, and though she did not feel threatened, she felt possessed by the memory of someone else's life. Finally, they agreed. It was not truly their home. It belonged to its first master, and perhaps it always would. On their last night in the house, Elaine placed fresh flowers by the fireplace. Richard left a single light burning in the study, as he had every night. Before they closed the door for the last time, they both said softly, "Goodbye, Michael. Thank you." As they walked to their car, the wind carried the faintest sound back to them. A man's deep, steady humming, rising and fading with the ocean breeze. They did not turn back. The house was listed again, marketed as a rare piece of Malibu history. Realtors praised its views, its craftsmanship, its celebrity legacy. Yet those who toured it often reported a strange feeling, as though the walls still listened, as though the air itself remembered. And so, the house remains, a place caught between worlds. For those who pass through its doors, the question lingers. Is it simply a home by the ocean, or the eternal refuge of Michael Landon, who never truly left? Would you spend a night here? Comment below. Which house should I do next?